No, you got it. You're on. There we go.
There you go.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Before we start, let's all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We have copies of the presentation if you want a copy.
Thank you so much.
There you go. Okay. So first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming. Tonight is a town hall format. We're going to have a discussion about the proposed 2023 budget. That budget has been worked on over the past month and a half, and we have some key pieces of discussion that we need to go through tonight, not only about the budget, but about the status of the reserve funds and the future of our reserve funds going forward. And before we jump into the details, what I want to do is also thank the Finance Committee. They've all been part of this process to pull together the information from the various committees so we can start rolling it up, and been very good at cross-checking my arithmetic and the logic behind some of the assumptions here. So I think we had a very good detailed review, roll-up review this last week, and then we started the packaging of the information. So can I ask each one of you to stand up and introduce yourselves to the community?
Sure. My name is Andrew Emmerich. My wife and I and kids live at 2545 Blackburn Circle.
Hi, I'm Lynn Smith, and my husband Denton and I live at 2489 Belleville Court.
Hi, I'm Sean Kinney. My wife Melanie and I live on Vermont Court.
Thomas Robertson, Wood 1. You all know me.
And I'm sure Tom's very happy about Judge's decision last week.
Cost me a lot of money, but
Okay, so today what we're going to go through is we're going to go through a top line, what I call a top line budget overview, sort of the top line numbers, and then we're going to dive into the details a bit. Then look at what the proposed assessments are going to be for the operating budget. Then we're going to shift gears and talk about the reserve study. And we're also going to have a discussion on Hurricane Ian. We have some updated information about where we are with total community expenses for recovery from Ian. And then we're going to sit back and give everybody a chance to ask questions. For those that are watching this on the live stream, what I would ask that if you can send your questions in by email, we'll work to get those answered, and then I'll work with the Communications Committee to figure out the best format to get the responses, the answers to those questions posted as quickly as possible. And then also, towards the end, we'll talk a bit about the process that we've got to go through. The other thing that I have to be upfront about is that if you sat through the process in previous years, you see there were at least 30 days to 45 days behind where you were. I believe the budget meetings last year were early November. Obviously, Hurricane Ian put a bit of a crimp into the schedule, so we really didn't start working on this until almost the third week in October. So that's why we're going to have some flexibility relative to the payment plan next year. Okay. So at a top level, we know that the macroeconomy is driving a lot of expense increases. We're in our biggest areas of expenses: landscaping, personnel, contracted services. We're all seeing increases being driven by the vendors. So overall, what we're looking at is the operating expenses for the community increasing 11% over the previous year. And the assessments obviously are in line with the increase in the operating expenses. So the largest percentage increases are in neighborhood landscaping. That specifically affects the residents in the Phase 3 community. Then the common area landscaping and repair and maintenance and utilities. And I think it's no surprise, utilities, since we're all seeing increases in our electrical bills, and water bills, so on and so forth. A key thing we'll be talking about the reserves. In the package that's been distributed to the community, you have the full reserve study that was prepared for our community. And what I'll be doing is we'll be focusing on the next 15 years. And the headline from that is that the reserve plan, the current funding mechanism for our reserve account will not meet our reserve expenses over the next 15 years. And we'll talk about that in more detail as we get to it. We are going to propose as part of the budget a change to the funding mechanisms for the reserve fund. Hurricane Ian, the net impact to the community is still being figured out. We have some updated gross numbers, or top line numbers that we'll be reviewing as part of today. We just received an initial claim settlement from our insurance carrier, and it's under review. I think it's fair to say that, like everyone else, the initial claim is not up to what we expect, so we have to go through a process. We're also up against a bit of a deadline with having to apply for an SBA loan by January 17th. That is the cutoff for nonprofits to be able to apply for a small business loan. And there are some different recovery options that we'll talk, expense recovery options we'll talk about when we get to that point. At the top level, what we're looking at is our assessment income moving to about $4.8 million, or about an 11% increase. And the operating expenses have a commensurate uptick. You'll see that neighborhood landscape and irrigation, utilities, landscaping, payroll and benefit are the largest portions of the budget. And those areas where we could have the most control, where we try to contain the cost as best we can. But most of these increases are being driven by the contractors and our vendors. Common area landscaping. The year-over-year increase is primarily reflecting two things. We have been seeing cost increases from Crawford that are part of their contractual. Within their contract, they have the ability to increase based on their increase in labor expenses and in fuel expenses. And also, if you remember, I think it was 2 meetings ago, we voted to add the conservation area and the gray areas to the Crawford contract. So when we go through the details, you'll see how much that is adding to the budget. Repair and maintenance. This year in 2022, we have a variance of $142,000 from what was budgeted. So what we've done, and it's been driven by gate repairs, pool repairs, and clubhouse repairs. It's just been like a continuous cycle of repair going on. So the budget for next year is based on the actuals of 22 with an assumption for a year-over-year cost increase. Utilities. When we met with Chuck, the general manager, what we're forecasting is a 15% increase in electricity, water, and recycling services over the course of the year. So that's what's driving those three key areas. Talking about landscaping for phase 3, that is the biggest portion of the budget, and per our contract with DTE, the column on the far left is what their monthly rates are going to be over the course of next year. In March, the contract allows them to do a CPI increase limited to 5%. So we built it into the budget, so we are building the budget around 996,873 based on their contract rates. Landscaping, for irrigation, we looked at what was the actual spend in 2022, and we basically looked at the activity prior to Hurricane Ian because that was more reflective of regular activity. And what we've done is we've taken that and given it a slight bump up, and that's how we've come up with the irrigation numbers for the 22, or for 23. Contingency for back payments. In the previous year's budget, the budget did not fully budget for increases that DTE is allowed to invoice us for. So there is a contingency in the budget to pay those back dues to DTE. And that comes to about $37,000, and we'll look at that. Now that is currently under discussion with DTE. And the intention is if we're able to get a settlement below the number that's in the budget, the difference will be credited back to the Phase 3 residents. So I'm going to shift over to the details, to the detailed budget now. So I'm going to sit down as we start walking through this. So the details that we're seeing primarily $4.8 million in assessment income. Right now we're assuming 3.39 of it comes from residential assessments. We are not looking at reserve assessment at this time. $1 million is the landscape assessment for the Phase 3 portion of the community, and that gets us to a total of the $4.8 million. We've looked at the activity for user fees and collections income and other income and investment income, and what we've done is put out and looked at primarily based on the actuals for the year instead of what was budgeted the previous year, which was a little bit high. Going through the operating expenses, a lot of this we met with the general manager to come up with these numbers, covering basically administrative costs, things, costs for meetings, bad debt, and basic stuff. We're looking at the largest percentage increase is coming in general admin. This is where this was one of the areas that was under budgeted for last year. This covers sort of general operating expenses for the management team. Under communications, it's primarily the community events. We've carried forward the Halloween event numbers, postage for getting mailers out to the community, and built into this $64,000 for community events. We had a complete proposal from the Lifestyle Committee that also included the Christmas activity, and we're including $2,500 for coffee and conversation funding during the course of the year. One of the good news about our budget next year is that the individuals that worked on the insurance budget, or the insurance policies with our agent over the past couple of years, put a very good risk management plan in place, and we're seeing a continual decrease from the budgeted amounts in our insurance premiums. So the numbers that we have here are based on the quote that we've got from our insurance agent for next year, based on the improvements we have in the risk of the community. Utilities, all third-party utilities, we're projecting a 15% year-over-year increase. The three largest ones, internet, telephone service, and internet service, are contracted services, so they're flat for next year. Common area landscaping, we are forecasting basically a 10% increase in the base charges from Crawford from 22 to 23. In addition to that, we have a $35,000 quote from Crawford to add gray areas and the conservation areas to their maintenance contract. In the DTE portion, this area represents the $996,000 that we talked about earlier. And this line item is the contingency for working out past due payments with DTE. For the irrigation component, we looked at actuals through September, and from that we looked at adding, so we came up with the numbers of so we came up with $62,000 for the irrigation maintenance in the Phase 3 community. Contracted services, the largest increases that we're seeing there are primarily going back and looking at the actuals that were spent into this year. So there was some of this area was under budgeted in the previous year, so it was primarily taking that into account. We do have increases in the pool contract, and we did add a new security company with an increased contract. Both of those were voted on by the board in previous meetings, so they were bundled into the budget at their contract rates. Repair and maintenance. I think we can say pre-Ian, this was probably the largest variance that we were seeing in the community from last year, from the 22 budget. And we've had a lot of gate strike activity that we've had to do, a lot of general repair that had to be done across the community. So this is just reflecting that and taking the actual through October and adding 10% cost of living increase to those expenses. Professional services, those are pretty much based on actuals through the course of the year. We did, at the general manager's recommendation, increase legal services collections. We do expect increased activity with collecting back payments from the residents next year. Property tax and federal income tax and real estate tax, what we're based on is actuals from the previous year. There will be additional income tax that we may have to pay once the tax return is completed for the capital gains on the sale of the sales center. But since we took the gross proceeds of the sale and put that in the reserve account, we will subtract the capital gains tax portion from that reserve account to pay that portion of the taxes owed. So what that yields is what we are looking at is increasing the base assessment $65 a quarter, and we're looking at increasing the phase 3 landscape assessment $62.85 a quarter, based on this budget. I went back and tried to do sort of a trend analysis on the assessments so we could do an apples and apples comparison. I think it's better to look at the bottom half, because last year, when you take the cable out of the equation, because when the cable service went away, we were paying, our base assessment without cable was really $441.84, and in 21, and then in 22 it got increased to $530, and we are looking at increasing it from $530 to $595. And the neighborhood assessment from 21 to 22 went up 5%, and from 22 to 23 we're looking at a 17% increase, primarily driven by increased costs from the vendor and resolving the back payment issue with the vendor. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears. As part of the financial package that was put into Town Square and Sandoval Live is a copy of the reserve study that was done for our community. It was when we first met with Reserve Engineering to go through the previous report, which was done in 2019, and we updated the needs of the community based on what portions of the community were going to be repaired from Hurricane Ian damages. So the next generation of repairs was then subsequently moved out in the new study. And we looked at projecting the community needs from 23 to 52. And if I'm still talking about this in 52, please help me. Okay. Right now, the projected spend between 23 and 36 is $10.3 million. A bulk of it is involved with redoing the roads when they reach 25 years of their life. And if you look at the next set of numbers, we're looking at primarily 1.6, 1.7, almost $2.4 million for phase 1 and phase 2 roads over a 3-year period. And then the phase 3 roads kick in at 2037. And that's approximately 25 years after their initial construction. One of the things that we determined is that the current funding of an initial contribution of $3,000 for every house sale is not going to sufficiently fund the reserve needs. One of the other things that we looked at is that there's a set of assumptions that the reserve study did in terms of what the rate of inflation is, how much interest income we would earn. I thought that their interest earned assumption was a little bit light, so I went back and redid the analysis with a slightly higher interest income at around 4%. I also added $75,000 per year of discretionary spend out of the reserve requirements. That is to cover things like if we decide to build a new shed, to replace what was done for Ian, or put a generator in the clubhouse for future storms and things like that. So that's why so I put that in there. I looked at, they use an inflation rate of 3.5%. If you say inflation is going to be higher over the course of those 15 years, let's say 5%, that adds about $1.3 million to the reserve expenses over that 15-year period. But what you can see is that as we start primarily spending the money on the road work, we deplete the reserve account and we go into deficit in the out years. And as a community, we can't have a deficit with that. We have to come up with a mechanism to keep these reserves fully funded to satisfy the infrastructure. Now, we can start delaying some of these projects, but in the end, we're still gonna see these shortfalls. So we looked at the different funding options. Right now, we fund the reserves primarily from a $3,000 per house sale contribution. The previous budget assumed 120 house sales last year. We're actually seeing closer to 100 this year. We are assuming that in 22 or 23 and 24, we are going to see the same level of house sales around 100, and we're not going to see a recovery back to that 120 plus level until we get past 25. Obviously, if that changes, we can make some adjustments, but we're trying to take a very conservative approach to how we think the real estate activity is going to be, both with the macro environment and with the particulars of this area as a result of the Hurricane Ian disruptions. So when we looked at different ways to fund the reserve account, we came up with 3 different ways. One is to increase the reserve contribution. That's the money that's paid in initial when a house is sold. Keep the reserve contribution at the current level and initiate a reserve assessment on the homeowners. So that means adding another charge onto your quarterly bills to pay for the shortfall. Or a hybrid combination. We sat down and we spent, I think, probably collectively a couple hours going through a couple of different scenarios. And what we looked at from a finance committee perspective, that we thought the best approach was to increase the reserve contribution from $3,000 to $5,000. That keeps us fully funded through, especially through the years when we have to do the road work. We end up with a balance that's around $2 million, so it's about $1 million short of where we are now. But we think the $2 million is still a comfortable margin to have in the reserve funds at that point in time. If we were to try to fully fund the shortfall by adding a reserve assessment to the community, it would be $160 per unit. And then that would be part of your payments going forward, basically for the next infinity. Hurricane Ian. Right now, the significant change we are seeing in the Hurricane Ian expenses from when we reviewed this last with the community at the November board meeting is that the lakefront erosion repair for Calypso is now being quoted at $264,000. Chuck is still working on getting active quotes to get that to try to see if we can do much better than that, but for today I decided to put in the worst case scenario. So we're seeing right now that we're approaching $1 million in gross expenses for Hurricane Ian recovery, and we still have to get quotes for lighting, stump removal for the 565 stumps that have to be removed in the community. Tennis courts, we're still trying to get a quote on that. Storm drains, and final quotes from Invera for their gate repair. And then we also have some lake pond maintenance activity that has to be done that we're still trying to get more quotes on. So the total costs are still being determined. We got our initial offer from the insurance company. I think you'd be surprised to see the insurance company did the same thing to the community that they're doing to everybody. They came back with an offer that we don't think is adequate, so we're in a bit of a bind in terms of we have to aggressively move forward with appealing the insurance offer, and we have a deadline of January 17th to file our application for a nonprofit small business loan at 1.875%. So over the next month, we'll have to work through all these issues, and probably it'll be into February to March timeframe before we have a good handle on what the net impact of the community is going to look like and how we're going to have to assess the community to cover the EM expenses. Next steps. Today we're doing the community presentation for the budget. At the board meeting on 15th, I will be submitting a proposed budget for consideration. Our community bylaws require that the community has 2 weeks to consider and comment on the budget once it's been formally submitted to the board. And we're looking at scheduling a special board meeting on January 5th to approve the budget. Because we are running late with the budget process this year, what we've worked out with associates is that the Q1 or January payment for assessments will be at the current rate, and then what we'll do is we'll amortize the 23 assessment increases over Q2, Q3, and Q4 payments. And so we'll have those final numbers once the final assessments have been worked out and approved. And that in a nutshell is the budget. So at this point, what I'd like to ask is people welcome to ask questions. We'll try to answer them as fully as possible. If we can't give a good answer, we'll try to make sure that we include that in the roll call of answers that we give electronically, or questions we give electronically.
I'd like to make a little statement. What he's gone through is going to be a recommendation that we give to the board. The board will actually determine what they want to do. So when we talk about the reserve study, and we talk about the reserve study and going from 3,000 to 5,000, that's something we're going to recommend to the board so that we're able to fund our reserves appropriately. And just as a show of hands, so I know how many people, when they bought their home, because I see more new faces, actually negotiated any part of the reserve, well, the amount that you paid to move in the community. You didn't negotiate. You came to one, so I know you didn't do that. So I just say that because it has been a comment that has been made that people are going to want to get a discount on their purchase, but none of you raised your hand. So it's something as you go to sell, it's the purchaser's responsibility to pay, not the seller's. So it's not when you sell, it's when they buy. So at the point when they buy, I had to pay mine when I came in, you have to pay yours when you come in. It's not a negotiable item, if you feel that way.
Is that rolled into the mortgage for that?
Excuse me?
Is it rolled into the mortgage on the closing date?
Well, when I closed, let me have that. So we closed January of 21, and that was part of our closing costs. So we had to have that as part of the cash through part of the settlement of the closing. So if anybody wants to come up, I'm suggesting they come up to the podium so that they can, so we can get it recorded properly. Go for it.
I'll move down
My name is Bill Todd. I was on the board for 2 years and served as treasurer, and I served as a non-board member treasurer last year. I went through this budget around 2 o'clock this afternoon when we first posted it to, what is it? What's the name of the website?
Town Square.
Town Square. Town Square. And I had no problems with it. It looks reasonable to me. It looks like the numbers that they've got in there are what we can expect. There is still a contingency to carry us forward and to try to build our fund balance in the future years. So I support this.
Beth Ann Holzek, Hayes. My question is the assessment in phase 3, the landscaping assessment. If I understand it correctly, part of that has to do with the breach of contract and the monies that hasn't. So once that is paid in full, will we actually see a decrease? question?
No.
Okay, so we're getting an assessment that's different than the other properties, phase 3. And part of the increase has to do with us being in breach of contract and not paying. So once that is paid in full, will we then see a decrease?
That's the 38,000.
Yes, now I understand your question. So, right. So to resolve the back payment, that's approximately $15 a quarter. That's that portion of the $62 increase that you're seeing. So to answer your question, that would not be carried forward into '24. So you will see, so your answer is, it's a long-winded yes.
Okay, all right, okay, thank you.
And let me give you one more. It says phase 3, but it's really just DTE customers, right?
Well, it's all
Yes.
phase 3.
It's not.
It's not just phase 3, it's all DTE.
customers.
There's some non-phase 3.
It's not phase 3 limited, it's all
Right.
DTE
I got you,
customers.
okay.
But we're all in the same
Okay,
scenario, not just phase 3.
thank you.
I just had a couple of clarifying points initially. I noticed the management fee, there was no increase. Did Associate give you any rhyme or reason, or they just being really nice guys? They weren't that nice to us, so that's what I was asking. I saw no management fee increase, is that accurate?
We just got some, a proposed amendment to their contract yesterday, that was the first time I've seen it. And we're having discussions with them about their proposal.
Okay.
So, we may see some change based on that.
Okay, just,
Yeah.
it jumped out at me. The other thing I noticed is you had it listed as a 15% increase for utilities. Again, I've been going through the budgets for Somerville, and that number was a little high for me. Like, our estimates weren't quite that high a percentage. I was just
What
curious how-
percentage are you looking at?
We had it at 9%. And it wasn't static, but, electric was a little different than water. Water was like 12%, electric we saw 6.5%. Sanitation was right at 6 to 7%.
Okay.
So, but our aggregate was lower than your 15. So I was just curious, your number just seemed a little high.
So Kathleen and I met with Chuck, we went over all the administrative expenses, and we talked about what number we thought was appropriate, and Chuck had recommended the 15%. So we can go back and have a discussion with them about that to see if it makes sense to be in line with your numbers, or if there needs to be some adjustment.
And I'm not saying that yours are inaccurate, just that what I'm seeing for you guys and what we were seeing for us, consumptions are a little different, et cetera, so it may or may not be in line.
Yeah.
The last point I have is, as it relates to the reserves, I know I've been one for years that have been screaming that our current reserve policy is unsustainable, and that $3,000 simply won't get you as deep as you assume, especially if you're going to basically rely on home sales, which is a fluctuating and it's tough to maintain that in any semblance of a solid reserve expectation. However, I was also very integrated into the last discussion around this topic that came up. And one of the things that, again, as a condo owner, some of the things that came to light for us both then, and I think they still apply. Somerville, while it's the largest community within Sandoval, we represent only 12% of the community. We do make up, depending upon the year, between 16 and 22% of that reserve contribution, because condos typically do have a higher resale rate than a lot of the other communities. If you look at the latest market trends, the average price of home sales within Sandoval at least are double the cost of a condo, at least double the cost of a villa. So if you start talking about a home in Sandoval that's selling for $700,000, $800,000, $900,000, which a lot of them have been. I mean, again, that's the upper market, and they're not all in that range necessarily. going from a $3,000 to a $5,000 contribution may not seem like a dramatic increase. You've got a condo that was selling around $220,000, even if it's currently selling for $385,000, which is the highest condo that we've sold so far. That $3,000 to $5,000 will basically terminate sales to a great extent, which is going to cut out a huge 18% of your 120 you were thinking you were going to get. That's huge. And I've talked to the village folks, and I know that they're not in much different shape. One of the things that we proposed is this, again, maybe shifting the paradigm from this flat 3 to 5% increase. If 5% is, or 5,000 is what you think is the net number that you need to fund reserves, what we've proposed in the past is maybe we need to be looking at a percentage-based or tier-based approach for this, because, like I said, because the disparity of larger homes that are selling for, like I said, $6,000, $7,000, $8,000, $100,000 compared to the villas or condos that maybe, and even some of the single-family homes, you know, they're going to be in that 3, 4, 5,000. It seems that the larger the home should probably pay a higher contribution on that front end, because of a percentage base, it makes more sense. Just something for consideration.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I want to take a shot at not answering that question, but kind of having a different thought process, okay? And I initially agreed with you. And I said, you know, it should be a specific this, and then a $900,000 house should be something different. And I'm tossing my head in my bed, and I'm going back and forth, and I said to myself, although I like my idea wasn't fair, because my now opinion is that we all get to use the same amenities and buildings. Just because you pay more for a home, I changed my mind. You shouldn't have to pay more to use the same amenity that you use. You come up and use our pool, we're both using that same pool, and A shouldn't pay more than B, or B shouldn't pay more than A. And I struggled with that for a while, and I agree with you. And I had this thing, you know, everything right, 500,000 should be this, anything below 500,000 was that. And my daughter was looking at condos, and they was just a straight percentage thing. And as I wrestled with that myself, I said, the amenity is the amenity, and that's really what we're trying to keep up. The road is the road. We all drive the same road just because we pay more. I don't think
the downside is because of the gross inequity of the percentages, you're going to dramatically drive down sales, which net hurts what you're trying to accomplish.
and I don't disagree with you. I just looked at it from a different point of view.
I'm here, not going anywhere, so I'm okay with it.
And that's going to be the board's decision, and I think you should bring it up at the time.
Oh, I will. Trust me.
Hey, Tom, would you want to have everybody pay the same amount of property taxes to Lee County?
Say the question again?
Well,
What about property taxes? The city doesn't charge, everybody uses the same roads, but not everybody pays the same property tax. Your property tax is based on your property and the value of your property. So we're all driving the same roads, we all get to use the same thing, but we all pay different amounts based on property taxes.
And again, I understand that.
That was not my
I
comment.
understand it, but we're all one community. We're just one community, and you are, and I say, please bring it up at the meeting, because I had to struggle going both ways, and I understand it,
bring it
so
up where?
I'm just making a personal thing. It has nothing to do with me sitting at this table. It's just how I had to face it and go over it and think it through the process and come up with a decision.
Does anybody else have any questions they'd like to go over?
Mine's not a question. This may seem awfully low, has it ever been considered, look at how much the prices of the homes have gone up, right? You said doubled. Has it ever been considered that those who are selling their home pay a fee to leave? I don't, again, I'm just a thought out there, you know, I don't know.
You know what, I don't know if we can do that. I'll have to check that. Okay.
It's not like we, pay a lot to sell the home, besides that.
Would anybody else like to ask any other questions? Comments?
I just want to make sure I'm understanding everything.
Come on up.
I live in phase 3 on Katie's, and I just want to make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying so far. It looks like the proposed increase is for $1,042.34.
Correct.
$62 of that is for what we owe DTE?
Yes.
Okay, so then once, right,
Well, what we will owe them as part of the contract going
that we
forward.
didn't pay, right, no.
Well, only $15 of the increase covers the past year.
Okay, so $62 is the fee for DTE? You said something about $62.
Yes, so let me go back to those numbers and we'll walk through that.
I just want to make sure I understand that in my
Yes.
head.
Quarterly.
So on the, right, so the quarterly assessment increase is $62.85.
$62.85.
$15 of that $62.85 is covering the underfunding of DTE for this year.
Okay, all right, but, okay. Your proposed increase, I thought was quarterly, $1,042.34, right? Isn't that what you have there?
That's the total payment.
That's what I mean, the total.
Right.
And now, and so now, right now, what we're paying is roughly about $911, correct?
No, yes,
So the increase is $120.
$127.85.
Right, and 62 is just the
For landscaping and,
landscaping,
right.
and the rest is just for the regular.
yes,
Okay, so then comes Ian, right?
right,
That, all the expenses for Ian hasn't been put in here. That's where
that
you're
is
gonna,
correct.
you're gonna wait till you get your payment, and then you're gonna decide if you're gonna give us an assessment, or you're gonna take a loan, or.
Correct.
So there could be more monies coming out of our pocket down the road.
Correct.
This is just for.
Operational
So if
expenses.
you live in,
If you live in a house that is serviced by DTE,
you're gonna have, that's gonna be your price.
one of the 613, yes.
That's a big increase, but okay.
It's,
Big increase. Plus whatever the assessment is, I'm sure there's gonna be one.
it's, we've got an existing contract with DTE. They have the ability to, they're charging us at a certain rate right now. They're charging us at $79,000 right now a month for the landscaping activity. And they have the ability to use their CPI clause to increase it to 85. Now, once we get a reset with DTE in place, we can talk about alternatives. So they may not be the choice for the whole year. But this is how we have to budget it for now.
Okay. And like I said, the assessment for the whole hurricane, some of us, I don't know, a lot of people like, in my homeowner's policy, I have a coverage up to $3,000 if I am assessed an assessment for damages for hurricane. So I have to call my insurance company to find out, do I need to get, once you guys decide, like, I'm gonna have to show them what paperwork I have to show them so that I can, if you assess this money, I can get it back.
Okay. Who's your insurance company?
From them.
Well, I have to look at that.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's quite a few people that might have it. Yeah, some of them have 5,000.
Okay.
So, you know, some have none.
We'll go back and look at our
So it's
policy.
not a lot of money, so if you don't have it, go look into it. So,
Thank you.
all right? Thank
Did
you.
I answer your questions?
Yeah, I just wanted to figure it all out. Just make sure that I was, sometimes when you listen to it, when you say it,
Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, come on up.
Just
This
real
was a
quick.
great presentation.
Really quick. I want to thank the Finance Committee. A lot of work, a lot of time, a very good presentation. Thanks very much for all your efforts. Volunteer doing it. Thank you. Appreciate it very much.
Okay. Thank you. All right. Okay, so if there's no more questions, thank you for your time, everybody.
Where's the next on the top?